Hey guys, welcome or welcome back to my kitchen. Happy New Year! There is no better way to start off this new year than having you some good old Haitian soup joumou. And don't let anyone tell you that this soup is just made for January 1st. You can have it any time of the year. I was actually away for the new year, which is why I had mine 10 days later, and I'm bringing it to you about probably 13 days later. Now, some of you may argue that I am really late, but I would just say I'm really early, okay? So next year, your video is already sitting here on the channel waiting on you. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel and you will have this soup joumou readily available to you for 2023. This video will be a little longer than usual because this soup requires a little bit more work. Don't get intimidated, guys. It's very easy to do. It just requires a few more steps. All the ingredients that I'm using here today will be listed for you in the description box. And you can also feel free by leaving me any additional questions in the comment section. Wow, that was the longest intro ever. Let's get right into this video. I have 1 pound of beef for stew. I will cut it smaller and you'll see that in a little bit. I have 1.5 pound of oxtail and 1 pound of beef neck bone. The way I clean it is very easy. I'm going to be using lime, salt, and hot water. So I'm going to squeeze 2 to 3 limes over my meat, depending on how much juice I'm getting out of each lime. I'm going to sprinkle about 1 teaspoon of salt over the meat. And in the meantime, as I'm doing this, I have my water on the stove coming to a boil. Okay? After I put the salt and lime, I'm just going to use the spoon to mix everything in. Then I'm going to bring that boiling water right over my meat. Let it sit for 5 minutes. Drain it out. And then I move on to marinating my meat. All of the meat will be cleaned the same exact way. So I have my meat separate because they all require different cooking time. You can make the soup with just stewed beef. And if you're making it with just stewed beef, honey, you will save yourself 2 hours. So you can skip the whole first part of this video. But I want my soup to be bomb and it requires more work, so I'm using oxtail and neck bone, beef neck bone, and those meat take longer to cook to be very tender, because when you're having this soup you want your meat to be really tender. So because I'm using those meat, that's why it's gonna require an additional 2 hours to cook my meat. Okay, again, if you're not going to be using these meat, just skip ahead in this video to where I start with the stewed beef. Okay, but if you're going to make it like me, the way my mama, the way my auntie make it, honey, coupe duet, then you want to be adding some oxtail and neck bone to your soup. This is how I'm cutting up my stewed beef. I say stew beef, but if you're going to purchase it in the store, it's going to say beef for stew. Same thing. So I'm cutting it up to this size. Let's marinate our meat. I'm going to marinate all 3 meats the same way. So I'm starting off with half of a lime. And then I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of my Haitian Apeti. I'm putting in about a few pinches of salt. 1 Maggie cube. I'm gonna use my hand to crush it really finely. The other 2 meats, I'm going to put half of a Maggie cube because it's a smaller portion of the meat. Okay, so I'm using 1 whole Maggie for my oxtail, but then the neck bone and stewed beef, I'll use half of a Maggie. I'm going to be using 1 packet of my Sazon Goya. This thing is so good. I love using it because it makes your meat look so good. It really, really enhances the color of your meat when you use it. I'm going to be putting in about a half a tablespoon of black pepper. And if you like spicy food, you can put in some cayenne pepper or whatever pepper you prefer. You will see that I rarely ever cook with pepper because I don't like spicy food. Neither does my husband, thank God. So I'm mixing it all in. Now, here is the secret, guys. This here is gold that I'm about to tell you. Anytime you're cooking a viande de faux, a meat that takes a very long time to cook and you want to speed up the process, you want to add baking powder and flour. It helps to soften the meat when it's cooking. So we put in half a teaspoon of baking powder and half a teaspoon of flour. I'm going to do the same thing for the neck bone. You mix it all in, and then I'm going to use this thing here that I recently discovered, which is so amazing. So it's a garlic it's a garlic crusher. So you don't have to use like your peeler to like keep peeling garlic. You can just put it in, and then just basically it crushes the garlic for you. It works like magic. I got it off of Amazon. Okay, so I'm gonna put about 3 garlic cloves in here because I love garlic. Garlic makes food so good. Mixing it all in, and as you see here, before my meat is even cooking, it already looks good. Thanks to the Sazon Goya. It really, really makes your meat look good, and it helps with the color. So I'm putting in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil here. Make sure the pan is well coated so it doesn't burn. It is a nonstick pan, but I also put a little bit of oil. And then I'm going to put in my meat. I'm going to put some water to get all of that season out. When you're cooking your meat, you're supposed to cook it on a very low heat, but honey, it's going to take forever. So let's say your stove goes from 1 to 10, 10 being the hottest, 1 being the coolest. I cooked it on about a 6.5 to 7. Okay, but you have to watch your meat because the water is going to keep going down fast. Okay, you can add anywhere from 1 to 1.5 cup of water, but you cannot add more than that, guys, because remember, all of the flavor is in the meat. So if you add too much water, you're not gonna get that flavor in your meat. You're gonna just, it's gonna like wash away all of the season. That's why you're adding in a little bit of water at a time, no more than 1.5 cup. So I'm going to cover my meat here and let this cook for 1 full hour, adding water as needed because the water will keep going down. So you have to keep your eyes on this. Here we have our vegetables and extra ingredients that are going in the soup. The star of the show is this delicious piece of pumpkin hair, okay? We're going to be using 2 of these. As you can see, it's nice and yellow, but sometimes they trick you, honey. It looks yellow and it looks good, but when you blend it, it doesn't come out like that nice color that you need. So the trick that I learned from my aunt is to get the frozen cooked squash. Here we go, honey. And this squash is very orange. So when you're going to blend your squash, you want to add this to it, and that helps with the color. And honey, just 1 packet will take you, just 1 container of it will take you a long way. And I'm making a pretty big pot of soup here. Okay, so I'm going to be using 1 of these to enhance the color. I'm going to also be using some butternut squash. I actually use the whole thing because I'm making a pretty big pot. But if you're making half of the size that I'm making, of course, you want to adjust your ingredients to the amount that you are making. use my video and recipe as a guide, but of course you have to alter it to make it yours. I'm going to be using half of this cabbage. This hair is actually called Yampi. This is really good. It's a yam. It's in the yam family, and it actually tastes pretty good in this soup. All right, so I'm using 2 of these, and you just peel it off just like yam, and you cut it up to put it in the soup. We're going to be using some ziti pasta, green onion, celery, leeks. We're cutting just the white part of the leeks. I'm not using the green leaves at the end. I'm going to be using a few of these leaves. This is called Culantro, and this actually makes the soup smell so good. It gives it like a really good scent. My aunt always uses it, and my mom, so I'm using it too. I'm going to be using a few potatoes. I'm only going to be using 1 turnip. I did have 2 here, but I ended up only using 1. Turnip is actually really delicious in this soup. I'm going to be using some thyme, parsley, and garlic. So this is what our oxtail looks like after 1 hour of cooking. And I'm going to be switching the pot. I'm going to be transferring this to another pot so I have more room to put in my neck bone. So after I transfer it, I'm going to do the same exact thing. Put in my beef neck bone, add in my 1.5 cup of water. The stove is at the same level. I'm not changing it. I'm going to cover this and let this cook for another hour. So in total, it will be 2 hours, adding water every time I need to add water. And you'll know when you need to add water because the water is going to significantly decrease. So that's when you add water. So it's just like it's looking like hair in the pot. So as that's cooking, now I'm going to peel off my squash and pumpkin. And then I'm going to set up a nice big pot of water. And I'm going to put in my pumpkin and my squash, putting everything all in there. Well, not everything, honey, just the squash and the pumpkin. Because you want to cook that so that way we can puree it. Puree. That way we can puree it. So in the water, in order to make it taste good, you want to add some flavoring. What flavoring are we going to be adding? We're going to be adding some adobo. You can add as much or as little as you want. I'm adding about half of a tablespoon. I'm adding in 2 tablespoons of my Haitian épices. Check that video out, guys, because I use this on everything. I'm crushing 1 Maggie cube in here, and I'm using 4 green onions. You just drop it in there, and all of that is going to add to the flavor when it is boiling. I'm going to cook this for 45 minutes. You want to make sure your pumpkin and squash is cooked where it's nice and soft, and that will make it easy to puree. Fast forward 2 hours later. Well, no, let me do it like SpongeBob. 2 hours later. All right, so now it's time to add the beef for stew. So you're going to add it right in, and then you're going to add about just 1 cup of water because as you can see, I have a lot of water in here already. So I'm just going to let that cook for 25 minutes. 25 minutes after, so now your meat has been cooking for a total overall time of about 2 hours and 25 minutes. This is the time you want to add your vegetables. Okay, when I say your vegetables, I'm talking about your carrot. You chop the carrot up like you see here. You see how I chopped up my cabbage, okay, very finely. We're talking about your celery, your turnip, and your leeks. We're going to add the other vegetables too. I just had too much going on, so I didn't add it. But you can pretty much add all of the other vegetables now, but you'll see me add it in later. I'm talking about the bell pepper, onions, parsley, and thyme. You want to add water, guys. You have to have water. You have to have liquid in this soup. So the same water that is cooking my squash and pumpkin, I'm going to take out 4 cups of that water and put it in here. It is key, guys. Don't just add water from the faucet. There's no flavor in that water. You're gonna kill the soup if you do that, honey. You gotta stop, and go get that water. Hopefully you didn't throw it out yet. Hopefully you're not watching this video and going along with it. I hope you watched this video before you made the soup. You got to use the water that was cooking the squash and the pumpkin, because that's the water that already has flavor, okay? If you do end up using water from the faucet, you just got to add more seasoning to your soup. Okay, so now that you add that water in, 4 cups of that water, you let that cook. And this is when I'm adding in the other vegetables I was telling you could have added before. Okay, you could have just added your bell peppers. I didn't have the green one, so I just used the red one. It doesn't matter. It all tastes good. Onions, parsley, and thyme. Okay, guys, we're going to let this cook for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, after 20 minutes, I taste my liquid, make sure it tastes good, and it is very light on season. Of course, you're adding so much. And remember, as your vegetable cooks down, especially your celery and your cabbage, it's also adding a water base into the soup. So it kind of takes away from the taste. So I'm just adding a little more adobo and seasoned salt, and I'm adding about maybe a teaspoon of each, but you add whatever you need to add. That's why you have to kind of taste, not kind of, but you have to taste as you go, because then you add what you need to add. Okay, so now, guys, after 20 minutes, I switched my pot again because, honey, your girl wasn't trying to make this huge pot, but it ended up happening. So we turned out with this huge pot, okay? So I switched the pot out, put a little bit more water. At this point, I added 4 more cups of water. Okay, you want to make sure you have some water in there. Now, this is 20 minutes later. I'm adding in my potato and the yampi, okay? Because you don't want to add them too early with the vegetables because they're going to be too soft. You don't want them to be mushy, you know? So once you add those in, guys, you can go ahead and puree your squash and pumpkin, because within 10 minutes it will be ready to go in the pot. So I'm pureeing everything and then I'm pouring it right in to our big pot of soup. You want to mix it in really well, and you can see the color instantly change. Let me blend the rest of that, pour it back in, and honey, that looks good. So I think I need just a little bit more water so it's not too thick, because keep in mind we're putting pasta in here, and the pasta really drinks the liquid. So I'm going to add about 2 cups of the liquid, the water that's left from the squash, in my blender, and then I'm just going to drain everything out. I'm not leaving anything behind for the blender. I'm going to give it a good mix, and now taste it. It tastes good. So I'm going to add in my pasta. Now, honestly, you only had to add about 1 cup or 2 cups of pasta. But I love pasta, so I just added the whole 16-ounce bag. And I shouldn't have did that because by the next day, I had to add a little bit of more water when I was reheating the soup because, of course, all of that pasta drank up all of my liquid. But that's fine. I'm not complaining. My husband wasn't complaining. Neither was my sisters because this soup had tastes really good. Okay, guys. So once you put in your pasta, you follow the instructions on the bag or the box with the pasta that you're using. I'm adding in my butter. You know, you don't seal the deal until you add the butter. And I'm going to leave this in for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, guys, this is what we're working with. Some bomb, delicious, to die for soup joumou. Now, with all this work we just did, I do not mind having this soup once a year, okay? It's a lot of work. But you can have this soup any time of the year. But January 1st is just tradition for us. It doesn't mean that you cannot have it on other days of the year. It just means that on that day, you already know if you Haitian, if you grew up in a Haitian household, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next 2 days is soup joumou. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for kicking it here in the kitchen with me. I hope you guys love this video enough to stick around by subscribing to this channel. Our kitchen is so fun. We have so much delicious food. Honey, we fat over here because we got some good, delicious, flavorful food, okay? So join the club. There's a lot of room for all of you guys. And if you have any questions, leave it in a comment for me. Like if you like this video, subscribe, share it with a friend, share it with a family member, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bon appétit! Pas fait chiche.